The Ukrainians and Russians were sitting down for what were politely but inaccurately described as negotiations earlier today. For both, Ukraine's bold and highly effective attack on air bases deep in Russian territory will have been ringing in their ears as they did so. Something of a coup for Ukraine, with dozens of Russian planes reportedly damaged or destroyed. It'll certainly have given their eyes a bit more of a sparkle as they looked at their counterparts across the table. The Russian side would have been expecting to be hovering menacingly over their opponents in the light of their new offensive assaults on Ukraine, including opening a new front in the northern Sumy region. And that kind of all still applies, but Ukraine made a dramatic statement of its ability to plan long-term for an effective strike and to keep such plans secret from the enemy, so to catch them by surprise. I doubt that either side wanted to be in the same room at all right now. They were there to exchange memoranda about what each side's terms for a proposed ceasefire would be. Ukraine's points were known in advance. The Financial Times published the full text yesterday, and they'd given them to Russia a couple of days previously. Russia, having initially agreed to submit its memorandum in advance, did what it can usually be relied upon to do, which was to then fail to do so. But it was already obvious that the Russian side would present their usual maximalist terms that the Ukraine side could never accept. And they do this deliberately because right now their strategy is to go through the motions of talking about peace while having zero intention of actually agreeing to bring about peace. And so it turned out. Once the memos were exchanged, there was nothing much to discuss. So the so-called talks lasted barely more than an hour. You might ask, why are both sides even going through the motions? Well, of course, it's all because, yes, of President Trump. Trump wanted there to be direct talks. He got bored of the reality that he couldn't just bully Ukraine into accepting the majority of Russia's terms on account of this being about them fighting for their lives and their country, not, negotiating a real estate deal. And he got bored indeed because he couldn't persuade Vladimir Putin to accept a subset of his original aims, should it turn out to be possible for Trump to bully Ukraine into accepting them. And that on account of Putin having a long-term goal to restore the imperial sovereignty of his vision of a greater Russia, a goal that he's not prepared to trade away for some favourable arrangements with, let's face it, an unpredictable Trump administration. And so bored are the would-be Nobel Peace Prize winners, the US stopped trying to be the intermediary in this process. So they are not the ones hosting the talks, they are not playing a leading role in them. But both sides are there anyway, because the unguided missile that is Donald Trump could still be crucially useful to either of them if they play their cards right. President Putin believes that he can keep Trump passive in relation to Russia, possibly get further wins in terms of America putting pressure on Ukraine. After all, he had another win just a couple of days ago when Trump's Ukraine envoy, Keith Kellogg, was telling ABC News that President Putin was right to be concerned about NATO expansion. Now remember, Kellogg was previously known to be more pro-Ukraine, unlike the witless Trump envoy to Russia, Steve Witkoff, who has been an enthusiastic Putin fan from the start. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov celebrated Kellogg's comments and agreed with a journalist's suggestion that they had come as a result of backdoor Russia-US talks. Just another acknowledgement of what is rather obviously sitting in full view for all to see. But the Ukrainians were at the talks anyway, and the Europeans are supporting them being there anyway, because for their part, they hope that in so doing, they will finally persuade Trump to pile in behind them as it becomes clear that really Putin's Russia is not serious about peace. They do this even though it's a total fantasy. They almost certainly know that it's a total fantasy. After all, nobody could have missed that Putin is not serious about peace. But they do it on the Disney principle. If your character finds themselves off the edge of a cliff, well, they won't start falling until the moment they look down. In other words, as long as you keep telling Trump that he is the leader of a free world, that he is being misled and being made a fool of by Putin, then maybe, just maybe, he will keep behaving as though that might be true for a bit longer anyway. More to the point, it will delay for as long as possible the moment when he steps off the fence in the other direction. Not that we expect that he would officially throw his lot in with Vladimir Putin, because that would take courage of a sort. But the definition of the US walking away from the conflict, because it could include withdrawing existing levels of support, like intelligence sharing on the battlefield, access to Starlink, for instance. Making a big difference by not doing something, that is a much easier path that Trump might be tempted into. Therefore, President Zelensky, who has just demonstrated how competent his country is when it comes to defending itself, he has to keep paying tribute to the least competent player on the geopolitical stage. By the way, some people are making a lot out of the fact that Ukraine didn't tell Trump in advance that they were carrying out the operation against the Russian airfields. Now, fun though it is to make it seem that it was a statement of deserved disrespect, to be fair, Ukraine, for very basic and sound reasons, generally never informed allies in advance when it was carrying out risky actions, especially those on Russian territory. They didn't do it when Biden was in office, and they didn't reportedly tell their valued, reliable European allies either in this case. High stakes, dangerous, secrecy key to success. Very basic logic. You don't tell anybody who doesn't need to know, because every extra person who knows is one more chance that it gets to the wrong ears and people die as a result. So they didn't do that, but they were highly competent. They caused Russia around $7 billion worth of damage to their war-fighting assets. That one act said everything to Russia that they had to say. And yet, there they were in Turkey, Russia and Ukraine. Peace was no closer for this meeting, and everybody knew it. I mean, I think they knew it. There's always a danger when when I decide to disregard what people say in public, because you can easily let yourself be fooled by how obvious you think things look from the outside, not realizing that maybe there's secret intelligence that may be known to them that you're not privy to. Mind you, we've seen that that can work both ways. Sometimes those secret understandings turn out to be wrong, and what was plainly obvious actually was true. For example, all those journalists who believe that Joe Biden was less cognitively impaired than was obviously the case because they erroneously believed what their insider Democrat contacts were telling them was the case behind the scenes. This is more consequential than that, though. So take the UK, for instance. While shooting this video, the UK is launching its major defence review, talking in detail about how its investment in defence over the coming years is going to be directed to meet the new threats and engage with the new techniques of warfare. By all reports, it talks about everything except for the one bleeding obvious thing that has completely changed, and that is the transformation of the United States from reliable and capable ally to disconnected at best and an actual adversary at worst. You will not find that spelled out in this document. I assume, again a presumption, that they know full well how big a change that is and how it changes every single thing. I assume they know that they can't rely on US supplied weapons, that they also have to focus on attempts to destabilise UK society, initially through Russian and Chinese disinformation measures, but now increasingly also the exact same approach from the United States. even sometimes sanctioned by the United States administration directly. So I assume they know all that. They're building that into their plans. But again, they believe that if they can avoid saying anything like that in public, they will fend off the moment when actually standing up to Trump, standing in opposition to Trump, becomes necessary because of all those consequences that will follow. But I could be wrong. They could genuinely be so committed to the UK's historical position as America's most loyal ally that they think this is just another moment where we do what we always did. We just need to hold our nose while we're doing it. Won't be the first time. Either could be true. One is the official position, minus the nose-holding bit, which I won't talk about. If it is that position, they are making a huge category error. Because as Gideon Rachman points out in the Financial Times today, Trump doesn't always just chicken out on tariffs. He does so whenever he's blustering about the threat of violence in foreign policy as well. An observation supported by this study by Jeremy Shapiro, where he says this: while large and outwardly powerful, he actually fears the use of force in any situation even vaguely resembling a fair fight. Actual violence only occurs against much weaker foes that have no hope of striking back. So yeah, don't hinge your policy on the expectation that a Trump-led United States could ever fulfill its Article 5 commitments as a member of NATO. That's Article 5, an attack on one shall be considered an attack against all. Nobody believes Trump is reliable for that commitment. Likewise, Pete Hegseth can go to Singapore and talk up the United States' readiness to respond to any Chinese action against Taiwan. Again, seriously, not a commitment I would recommend you presume that you could take to the bank. Ukraine and its allies should not be fooled. The way Trump can be powerful in their conflict with Russia is only by playing strategic ambiguity, making it about him, when it would be better for those involved to focus on what they need to do within their own sphere to win. Trump can be powerful in their conflict only by seeking to push the weaker party into a corner in order to gain favours with the stronger, which won't do him any good anyway. He can do damage by omission, the thing he doesn't do in situations where any of his predecessors would have drawn a line. It'll only hurt you if you expect him to do the thing. He can do damage by emboldening others who realise that those red lines that used to be there no longer apply. All of that damage only goes one way. Even if Trump is so furious at the taco, Trump always chickens out label, that he decides he has to stick with one of his threats to show that he doesn't chicken out, and that seems entirely possible, I guarantee it's more likely to be the tariffs. It won't be the threats that he might make against a nuclear weapons power led by someone like Putin. In the meantime, those who have not made themselves subservient to the Trump enterprise continue to point out some of the obvious things that we're talking about. So, for example, Trump's former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, was in Odessa a couple of days ago. He called for Trump not to do what he has threatened to do, i.e. have the United States recognising Crimea officially as Russian territory. He said it would be a mistake of epic proportions. And there's no doubt he's right about that. Unfortunately, to all appearances, you could actually take that as the inspirational motto of the current Trump team. Sooner or later, Pompeo, Zelensky, Starmer, Macron, Merz and all the others will have to pluck up the courage to say so out loud, because Trump's response to that is going to be less dangerous, less harmful in the long run than them continuing to pretend and thereby giving him more power than he should really have in this process.